Hey guys, Curious Hobbyist here. Welcome back to my channel. In a previous video, I showed you how I use SketchUp to design this model. Today, I'm going to be importing it into a game engine software called Unity. So, let's get started. First, I need to have a character in the game. However, I don't want it to be a stock shape. I also want something animated. And I don't know how to design 3D animated characters. So I decided to look for a tutorial project under the Learn tab to add my model to. When you click here, the first thing you see are these tutorials. These tutorials are about basic knowledge of Unity, and they're found under Basic Tutorials. So let's open the first one. Once it opened, the first thing I saw was an instructor window, which also prevents you from doing anything except for what the tutorial instructs you to. I won't want this later, but for now, I'm just wanting to look at the gameplay, so let's do that. The premise of this game is to move the player towards the goal using the arrow keys. Once you reach the goal, some sound effects and animations play. I do like this player character, so I'm definitely thinking about using this project. However, I still want to see if the other tutorials have more resources. So I tried opening the second project, and yep, just as I thought. This one definitely has more resources, because there are lasers, boxes, and switches. There's also a death animation, or maybe there was one in the first project, and if it had a laser, you could trigger it by running into it. But that doesn't really matter to me. So then I opened the third project, and this one has a fence, a door, and an enemy. However, the second one also has things that this doesn't. These are lasers, boxes, and a platform and pusher for the boxes. The last project was missing the fence. However, it still has the door, and it also has a box pusher. And during the tutorial, you also add a ramp and a box to the area. So as you just saw, these resources are definitely a bit spread out. However, I do have an idea of getting around this. So I'm going to choose to open the third project. But first, I need to get rid of the Instructor tab. To do that, click on the drop down on the top right of the Instructor. Then select Close Tab. This will allow you to select and edit any resource or setting in the project. Then I selected the door, fence, and enemy objects, copied them, and tried to paste them into the second project. Unfortunately, I did run into a problem. It doesn't work. This might be because the contents in the hierarchy view reference the contents of the project, i.e., any files you may have added, such as images and models. So this is going to be harder than I thought. Anyways, we don't even have to deal with this now, so let's move on. We already know that the second project contains the most resources. So, that's what we're going to use. So next, I moved on to adding the model. First, I exported it. To do that, go to the top left of your screen and choose File, Export, 3D Model. Then choose the format. I chose the DAE file format. You can also bring up an options window. For instance, I have found that the finished model wouldn't have all the faces, and try selecting the Triangulate Faces option. And I did find that that solved the issue. Now to confirm the export and add the file to Project 2. To do that, drag the file to the Project view. The Project tab shows files you've added to your project. This can include music, videos, images, and of course, models. I'll also disable everything except the player for now, because I'm not using them just yet. And then, add them all to the hierarchy view. Now it's time to test the game. However, the player character falls through the ground. Here's why. The model I added has no collider yet. So here's how to add one to a model you made. Select the model in the scene or hierarchy. Now click on Add Component. Now go to Physics and select Mesh Collision. This will automatically apply surface collision to every face in your model. Now let's run the test again. What's going on? I thought I just added collision to every face, including the ground. Well, maybe that's not what happened exactly. So I tried looking at the mesh collider, and I did notice something curious. The collider contains a slot. I did try clicking on that slot, and this led me to the source of the mesh in the Project tab. This mesh is located with hundreds of other meshes. The collider component only applied collision to the mesh in the slot. This means to apply collision to everything, I would have to add hundreds of mesh colliders and drag each mesh to a slot in each component. This would take a really long time. However, I did notice these group meshes. Most of these are the spikes and bridge rail poles that I made groups of in SketchUp. So what if I went back to SketchUp, grouped everything, and re-exported? Well, I tried that and then added the model back to the project view. Then I opened the models dropdown and examined the meshes. None of them seemed to have the full model. However, I did find another object that did, called Group 0. I then dragged it to the mesh slot with much doubt, and rightly so. This object was not a mesh, so it didn't work either. But there has to be a way, right? So I tried searching for one, and I found an article about 3D models in Unity. I decided to read it and came across something interesting. Generally, proprietary models are not compatible with other design programs, and that's the reason I exported this. However, one exception is SketchUp model files, which SketchUp and Unity can use. Interesting. I wouldn't have ever thought this. So next, I tried the SketchUp version before trying anything else with the DAE Collada version. Again, add it to the project and add it to the scene. When I did that, I immediately noticed this ground face that wasn't displaying at all on the top side. I'll need to fix this, but I can still test this. Also, the model size was way too small for the player character, so I decided to scale the model tenfold in all three directions. I also moved the goal out of the way. I then added mesh collision. However, the slot mesh only had one face for some reason, so I looked around for another mesh that had more of the model. I did find one called Group 2. This one has way more of the model. So let's drag this in and test again. The player still falls through the model. As annoying as it was, I decided to examine the model. Eventually, I did find a problem. This face in the middle of the chute is still there. I need to fix this, but first I need to ungroup everything. Next, I selected the face and wanted to make sure it was still separate. And it wasn't. Strange, I thought I already got rid of this thing. So I used the line tool to separate the face and deleted it. Then I added the model to the project once again. And here's the default slot mesh. Interestingly, it actually contains the full model. That might be because I didn't regroup the model in SketchUp. Next, I upscaled the model and ran the test once more. And this time, the player does not fall through. Finally, some results! Now, we can move the player around the model just like it did on the old arena. However, the camera does not follow the player. Also, the top side of the face is still not showing. So I tried editing the model in SketchUp again, and I did see another issue. The outside lines in the chute did not seem to be there. So I tried recreating them. I also went over some of these main lines. And finally, I add the model to the project again, and the top side of the face still doesn't show. Another thing I tried is drawing some random lines on the surface. It still didn't work. The last thing I did is change the color of the surface, and just out of curiosity, I tried changing it back. If that doesn't work, I don't know what to do, because I've already tried everything else I can think of. So finally, I imported the model one last time, dragged the model back to the world, and this is just the result I was hoping for. If you have the same problem, I definitely recommend trying this. Okay, back to the game. I scaled the model once again and added collision. Next, I tested the game and tried to enter the tower. However, the player character still didn't fit. So let's try scaling it. Currently, the player scale is 1.5. So let's try changing it to 1. It still doesn't quite fit, because its height is just over the doorway height. It's also worth mentioning that the player character should be just shorter than a doorway height. So I chose to make it about 2/3 as tall. Now, it finally fits through the door. So next, I moved on to controlling the camera. First, I tried using some scripting methods. Here's the first one I've tried. First, I made 4 variables. The first one is a vector 3 called offset position. A vector 3 is a container for 3-direction values. Public means it can be edited in the inspector. The next one is a transform called player. A transform is a slot for a game object. If you drag one in, its transform position will be edited by the following code. The next 2 are public values called move and turn. These values are editable numeric fields in the inspector, which I reference later to move and rotate the camera. This makes them easier to edit without having to reopen and rebuild the script. Update contains code that you want the game to run every frame the game runs at. In short, constantly. With the next line of code, this will ensure that the camera position is always following the player position, with the offset position value added. Again, you can edit the value in the inspector. The next line means when the A key is held down, the camera will move left. The speed of this movement is multiplied by the public move value, and time.delta time means this is how far it moves every second, instead of moving every frame. Then I add another line for rotation. I want the camera to move and rotate around the player. Now, let's test the game and press A. However, the player character also moved left. We can also use W, S, and D to move it. So the player position is also controlled by those keys. However, there is a way to fix that. Go to the menu bar at the top left of your screen and select Edit, Project Settings, and then Input. In this case, the player is controlled by the axes, so now go to Axes Horizontal. This is for left and right movement. The main controls are the arrow keys. However, there's also alternative controls. In this case, these controls are A and D, which I just tried to use for camera movement. To fix that, simply delete the keys from the fields. This will disable alternative input. Now, let's test again. When I pressed A, I did get some results. However, the camera movement was kind of jittery. It does rotate, but very slowly. So let's try changing the turn speed. This does make the rotation faster. However, the camera's rotation is kind of skewed. I only want it to rotate on the up axis. However, it seems to rotate on a kind of skewed up axis. So halfway through rotation, the camera faces slightly up, instead of facing slightly down. So here's where I learned the translate and rotate functions I just used. The following clip might be the reason for that.
It should be noted that these functions work on the local axis rather than in the world axis. So where I'm using vector3.forward or vector3.up, this is relative to the axis of the object it's applied to,
i.e. the camera. So next, I tried adding a physics component to the camera. Then I opened the constraints dropdown and froze the rotation on X and Z. Then I set the physics type to kinematic. That's because it's a physics component, and by default, the object it's attached to will fall. Then I ran the test again. It's still skewed. And here's the reason. Again, all credit goes to Unity for this clip.
It's also notable that if you want to move an object with a collider, so something that's going to be interacting with physics, then you should not use translate or rotate. Rather use the physics functions instead, and you can see these in a separate lesson.
This makes perfect sense. I tried to freeze the rotation with a physics component. Also, the camera's rotation won't change the player's forward direction, so I don't really know how I would do that. I didn't want to mess with the script anymore, so I tried attaching the main camera to the player. When I started the game, I tried pressing the left and right arrow keys. This caused the camera to orbit the player really fast. However, it is rotating. I tried to look at the player, and I did notice something interesting. The player object has a script, and the script has two values for turn speed. These act as a limit for how fast the player can turn. However, these values were made to be higher because originally they didn't control the camera. So next, I changed the values way lower and tested the game. And this is what happened. However, the stationary speed was slightly higher than the moving speed. So next, I divided that in half. On second thought, they could both go a bit lower. Next, I started the game and tested the course. For my engineering, these controls are pretty good. In another video, I may add audio and other elements from the tutorial, and maybe expand the model as well. Well, that's it, and that's all. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, feel free to like it, share with family and friends, and subscribe for more interesting videos. If you want to be notified on my new uploads, click on the bell that appears after you subscribe. I usually try to upload new videos on Saturdays or Sundays. And to check out my channel, click here. I have more videos that I think you would find interesting to watch. If you have questions or requests, you can let me know in the comments. As always, thanks for watching.